Let me see what other categories we got here. Fantasy. And like I said, the fantasy meets a lot of categories. You know, almost every anime is fantasy to a certain degree. Like besides like stuff like slice of life and stuff like that, like anime is fantasy. You know, the ones where there's monsters and powers and this, down the third. Ooh, that's another one. One Punch Man, like action. Even though sometimes they be talking. It's like, yo, why y'all talking? It's One Punch Man. Let the man punch things. But yeah. So for fantasy, I go with Berserk. Love Berserk for fantasy. Franchise, say that weird thing again. But Berserk isn't so much like centered. It's like dark fantasy, yeah, but it is technically still fantasy. X Holic. I consider that fantasy, even though it's meant has a, I would say, a psychological thriller slash horror. Fantasy. Like, there's so many anime that fit that category of fantasy. Even like the standard Naruto, Bleach. You know, kids blowing out fireballs through their mouths. Like, if that's not fantasy, I don't know what is. For fantasies, like my list, and you could tell by me kind of going over episodes or shows per genre, like shows you the kind of anime that I'm into. Fantasies that I would recommend, I like Maggie. It's a show called Maggie. I will not lie, it feels like it ripped off a lot from Aladdin. A lot of similarities, but definitely Maggie. Funny enough, my coach, he recommended that to me a while ago. So I love Maggie. Maggie definitely for the fantasy aspect. And then another show I recommend for fantasy might be kind of corny. I don't know, but I'm thinking like Ah My Goddess, but that's more romance, or Tenchi Muyo. That's technically fantasy, but again, that genre is so broad that like if you're looking for something that's pure fantasy, I'm probably have to make a separate video about that because almost anything could be the category of fantasy, in my opinion. Right. Moving along.